When people think of Japanese ghost stories, their minds immediately drift to the infamous trio that has dominated horror cinema for decades: Sadako crawling from her well in The Ring, or perhaps the vengeful Kayako from The Grudge. But these modern interpretations barely scratch the surface of Japan's rich tapestry of supernatural folklore. Beyond the well-known tales of Okiku, Oiwa, and Otsuyu, the Nihon Sandai Kaidan, or Japan's three great ghost stories, lies a treasure trove of heart-wrenching narratives that reveal the deepest sorrows of the human condition. Originally based on didactic Buddhist tales, Kaidan often involve elements of karma, and especially ghostly vengeance for misdeeds. But what makes these lesser-known stories so profoundly moving is not their capacity to terrify, but their ability to break your heart. These are tales of mothers who couldn't let go, children trapped between worlds, and souls so damaged by life's cruelties that death itself couldn't heal their wounds. These aren't just ghost stories, they're mirrors reflecting the deepest fears and loves that define our humanity. They speak to every parent who worries about their children, every child who fears abandonment, and every soul who has ever loved so deeply that not even death could sever the connection. Chapter 1. In the misty mountains of rural Japan, where ancient forests whisper secrets older than memory, there exists a particular kind of ghost that embodies perhaps the most powerful force in the universe: a mother's love. The ubyum, mother ghosts who died in childbirth, or died leaving young children behind, represent one of the most heartbreaking categories of Japanese spirits. Their very existence a testament to bonds that transcend death itself. Unlike the vengeful onryo that dominate popular culture, ubume are driven not by rage or revenge, but by an overwhelming compulsion to protect and nurture. This yurei returns to care for her children, often bringing them sweets. But their benevolent intentions often mask a deeper tragedy. These are souls so consumed with maternal duty that they cannot accept the finality of death. The most documented accounts of ubyum encounters come from Japan's rural prefectures, where childbirth was once a perilous journey that claimed the lives of countless young mothers. Historical records from the Edo period describe numerous sightings of women in white burial kimono, wandering the edges of villages with their arms cradled as if holding an invisible infant. What makes these accounts particularly poignant is their consistency across centuries and regions. These are not isolated folk tales, but recurring phenomena reported by multiple generations of witnesses. One of the most heart-wrenching accounts comes from the mountains of Gifu Prefecture, recorded in the early 1800s. A young mother named Sachiko died during a difficult winter birth, her newborn daughter surviving only 3 days longer. Villagers reported seeing Sachiko's ghost for months afterward, always at twilight, walking the path between her home and the village shrine where her daughter was buried. Witnesses described her as constantly humming lullabies, her empty arms swaying in the gentle rocking motion of a mother soothing her child. What distinguished Sachiko's haunting from typical ghost encounters was its profoundly peaceful nature. She never frightened anyone or caused harm. Instead, nursing mothers in the village began reporting that their own children would suddenly stop crying and seem to be listening to something they couldn't hear. Elderly women claimed they could sometimes catch fragments of her lullabies on the wind, always the same song she had sung during pregnancy, believing her unborn child could hear her voice. The tragedy deepened when villagers discovered that Sachiko's ghost was methodically visiting every newborn in the community, attempting to comfort crying babies whose mothers were struggling. Several new mothers reported waking to find their feverish infants suddenly peaceful, cool to the touch, and sleeping soundly. They described sensing a presence in the room, gentle, protective, and infinitely sad. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of Sachiko's story was its resolution. After 6 months of sightings, her appearances became increasingly erratic. Witnesses noted that she seemed to be growing more transparent, her lullabies fainter. The final confirmed sighting came when a traveling merchant, unaware of the local haunting, encountered a woman in white on the mountain path. She asked him if he had seen her baby, describing the infant in detail. When the merchant gently explained that she appeared to be alone, Sachiko looked down at her empty arms with such profound confusion and grief that the man later said it was the most heartbreaking sight of his life. She vanished that night and was never seen again. According to local Buddhist priests, Sachiko had finally accepted what her maternal instincts had refused to acknowledge, that her child was gone and her earthly duties were complete. Her last act of love was to let go. This pattern repeats throughout Japanese folklore obium, who linger not out of malice, but from an inability to reconcile their deepest biological imperative with the reality of death. In Iwate Prefecture, historical records describe Midori, a young mother who died in childbirth, but whose spirit continued to attempt to nurse her surviving twin boys. Village wet nurses reported mysterious assistance during difficult feedings, and the children grew unusually strong and healthy despite their mother's death. What makes Yubume stories particularly poignant in modern Japan is their reflection of historical realities. During the Edo period, maternal mortality rates were staggeringly high, and many children lost their mothers before forming conscious memories. These ghost stories served as a form of comfort, suggesting that maternal love was so powerful it could transcend death itself. The Yubium phenomenon also reveals profound insights into Japanese concepts of duty and sacrifice. In a society where women's primary value was often measured by their ability to bear and raise children, death in childbirth represented the ultimate failure duty left catastrophically incomplete. The Ubium embodies the cultural belief that such profound responsibility creates spiritual obligations that survive physical death. Modern paranormal investigators in Japan continue to document Ubium encounters, particularly in regions with aging populations and abandoned communities. These contemporary sightings often occur near former maternity hospitals or in towns where entire generations have moved away, leaving behind empty houses that once rang with children's laughter. Witnesses describe seeing women in outdated clothing, clearly distressed, searching through empty lots where homes once stood. The enduring power of Ubium stories lies not in their supernatural elements, but in their unflinching examination of love's ability to become both blessing and curse. These spirits represent every parent's deepest fear, that death might separate them from their children when those children need them most. Yet they also embody every parent's deepest hope that love creates bonds so strong that not even death can break them. In a world where maternal mortality remains a global crisis, the Ubium reminds us that behind every statistic is a potential ghost story, love so fierce it refuses to be extinguished, a duty so sacred it transcends mortality itself. They are not monsters to be feared, but manifestations of humanity's most noble impulse, transformed by tragedy into something beautiful and terrible and eternally sad. Chapter 2. Hidden in the traditional farmhouses of northern Japan's Iwate Prefecture lives a secret that families have whispered about for generations. Zashiki Warashi, the ghosts of children who are described as mischievous and like pulling pranks on the living. They are often mentioned in the local folklore of Iwate Prefecture and are said to bring good fortune to the houses they inhabit. But beneath their reputation as benevolent household spirits lies one of Japan's most heartbreaking supernatural tragedies, the story of children who died so young they never learned that death was supposed to separate them from the world of the living. Unlike the vengeful spirits that dominate Japanese horror, Zashiki Warashi are characterized by their childlike innocence and their desperate desire to remain part of a family, any family, even in death. These are not the ghosts of children seeking revenge or resolution. They are lost souls who simply refuse to understand why the adults around them can no longer see them play. The name itself reveals the tragedy. Zashiki refers to the traditional tatami mat guest rooms found in Japanese homes, while Warashi is an archaic term for child. These spirits are forever relegated to being guests in houses they desperately want to call home, visible only to other children and the occasional sensitive adult, existing in a liminal space between belonging and exclusion. The most thoroughly documented case of Zashiki Warashi activity occurred in the Kudo family home in rural Iwate during the early 1900s. The family had lost their youngest son, 5-year-old Hiroshi, to tuberculosis during a particularly harsh winter. What began as typical grieving took an unusual turn when the surviving children began reporting that Hiroshi was still playing with them in the upstairs Zashiki room. Initially dismissed as childhood coping mechanisms, the reports became impossible to ignore when the phenomena extended beyond the children's testimonies. Family members began finding small toys arranged in patterns they hadn't left them in, hearing the sound of bouncing balls from empty rooms, and discovering tiny handprints on dusty surfaces at child height. The most compelling evidence came during the family's evening meals, when an extra rice bowl would somehow appear at the table, always in the spot where Hiroshi used to sit. What made Hiroshi's haunting particularly poignant was its gentle, almost desperate nature. The surviving children described him as trying constantly to get adults to notice him, tugging on their sleeves and calling their names, becoming increasingly frustrated when his parents couldn't see or hear him. His older sister Emiko reported that Hiroshi would often cry himself to sleep, confused about why his mother no longer sang him lullabies or why his father wouldn't play with him anymore. The situation reached a heartbreaking climax during the family's Buddhist memorial service for Hiroshi on the first anniversary of his death. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a small figure in traditional children's clothing standing at the edge of the ceremonial area, reaching toward the memorial tablet bearing his name. Several guests described the overwhelming sense of a child desperately trying to understand why everyone was so sad when he was right there, trying to comfort them. But the most devastating aspect of Hiroshi's manifestation was its gradual recognition of his own condition. Emiko later recounted how her deceased brother slowly became aware that he was different from the living children he played with. She described conversations where Hiroshi asked why he never felt hungry anymore, why he couldn't feel the cold winter air, and why he could sometimes see through his own hands. The realization of his death, when it finally came, was reportedly traumatic for both Hiroshi's spirit and the family. Emiko described finding her brother's ghost sitting alone in the zashiki room, no longer playing or seeking attention, simply existing in quiet contemplation of his circumstances. The childish joy that had characterized his haunting was replaced by a profound sadness that seemed to permeate the entire house. This pattern of awareness and subsequent melancholy appears consistently in documented zashiki warashi cases. These child spirits often begin their hauntings in a state of blissful ignorance, continuing their childhood activities as if nothing has changed. But exposure to the living world gradually teaches them the reality of their situation, transforming them from playful presences into achingly lonely observers of a life they can no longer fully participate in. The traditional belief that zashiki warashi bring good fortune to households masks a deeper cultural understanding of these spirits' true nature. Families who report long-term zashiki warashi activity often describe a bittersweet existence prosperity and protection accompanied by the constant awareness of a child's presence that can never be fully acknowledged or comforted. The good fortune these spirits bring is often interpreted as their attempts to contribute to the family that has become their only connection to existence. Modern psychological research into childhood grief provides disturbing parallels to zashiki warashi behavior. Child development experts note that very young children often cannot fully comprehend the permanence of death, leading to extended periods where they continue to seek interaction with deceased family members. The zashiki warashi phenomenon may represent the cultural externalization of this developmental reality children who died so young they lack the cognitive framework to understand their new state of being. Contemporary accounts of zashiki warashi continue to emerge from rural Japan, particularly in regions experiencing population decline. These modern reports often describe child spirits in abandoned schools and empty playgrounds, suggesting that urbanization and changing family structures may be creating new categories of displaced child spirits. Witnesses report seeing children playing alone in places where families once lived, their activities becoming increasingly solitary as the years pass without new families to interact with. The tragedy of zashiki warashi extends beyond individual cases to reflect broader societal fears about childhood and belonging. In a culture that highly values family continuity and ancestor veneration, these child spirits represent the ultimate disruption young souls who died before they could fulfill their expected role in the generational cycle, leaving them forever suspended between childhood and adulthood, between life and death, between family and isolation. Perhaps most heartbreaking is the traditional method for helping zashiki warashi find peace. Unlike other spirits who require vengeance or resolution, these child ghosts can only be helped by being gently taught that it's time to move on essentially, by teaching them to accept death in a way they were too young to understand in life. Families who successfully help zashiki warashi transition often describe the process as similar to helping a lost child find their way home, knowing that home is somewhere the family themselves cannot follow. The enduring power of zashiki warashi stories lies in their reflection of every parent's nightmare, the death of a child, combined with every child's deepest fear of abandonment by family. These spirits embody the cruel irony that those who die youngest often cling most desperately to life, not because they understand its value, but because they lack the wisdom to let it go. Chapter 3. In the urban legends that spread through modern Japan like wildfire, few figures are as instantly recognizable as the Kuchisake Onath, slit-mouthed woman. Children hurry home from school, avoiding dark alleys where she might lurk, ready to ask her terrifying question, "Am I beautiful?" But behind this contemporary boogeyman lies one of Japan's most tragic tales of love, destroyed by jealousy, beauty twisted by obsession, and a woman whose quest for perfection led to her ultimate disfigurement. The story begins not in the urban sprawl of modern Japan, but in the imperial court of the Heian period, where a woman named Masako lived as the wife of a high-ranking samurai. Historical court records from the late 800 CE describe Masako as possessing legendary beauty skin like fresh snow, lips like cherry blossoms, and features so perfectly proportioned that court poets compared her to the moon goddess herself. But Masako's beauty, rather than being a blessing, became the source of her ultimate destruction. Masako's husband, Taira no Nobusuke, was a warrior frequently absent on military campaigns. During his absences, Masako became increasingly paranoid about losing her beauty and consequently her husband's love. Court ladies reported that she would spend hours each day examining her reflection, searching for signs of aging, and consulting with court beauticians about maintaining her appearance. What began as reasonable vanity gradually evolved into destructive obsession. The situation deteriorated when rumors reached Masako that her husband had taken a young concubine during his latest campaign. Whether these rumors were true remains unclear from historical accounts, but their effect on Masako was devastating. Witnesses described her flying into violent rages, destroying mirrors and attacking servants who she suspected of reporting unfavorable comparisons between her beauty and that of younger women. Masako's obsession reached its tragic climax when she encountered a traveling beauty practitioner who claimed to possess a secret technique that would preserve her looks forever. The procedure, according to court records, involved applying a mixture of toxic substances to her face, followed by ritual scarification designed to lock in beauty. What the practitioner either didn't know or didn't reveal was that the substances were highly corrosive. The treatment went catastrophically wrong. Instead of preserving Masako's beauty, the toxic mixture burned through the skin around her mouth, creating horrible wounds that extended her smile into a grotesque rictus from ear to ear. The scarification, performed while she was semi-conscious from the poison, permanently mutilated her face beyond recognition. When Masako finally saw herself in a mirror, court ladies reported that her scream could be heard throughout the palace. But the physical disfigurement was only the beginning of Masako's tragedy. Her husband, returning from his campaign to find his wife transformed into what he considered a monster, immediately divorced her and banished her from court. Masako's family, horrified by her appearance and the scandal surrounding her obsession, disowned her completely. Within a matter of days, she went from being one of the most celebrated beauties in Japan to a complete social pariah. Historical records suggest that Masako spent her final years living as a hermit in the mountains outside Kyoto, covering her disfigured face with white masks and becoming increasingly unstable. Local villagers reported seeing a figure in white wandering the forest paths at night, always keeping to the shadows, occasionally heard weeping or talking to herself about beauty and jealousy. Some accounts suggest she began attacking young women she encountered, either out of jealousy for their intact beauty or in delusional attempts to save them from the vanity that had destroyed her. Masako's death, when it came, was as tragic as her life. According to records from a nearby temple, she was found frozen to death during a harsh winter, clutching a broken mirror shard and wearing a crude mask made from tree bark. Her final act had apparently been attempting to look at her reflection one last time. The monks who discovered her body reported that even in death, her face bore an expression of infinite sadness. But death did not bring Masako peace. Within months of her burial, travelers began reporting encounters with a masked woman who would approach them on lonely roads, asking, "Am I beautiful?" Those who answered no would be attacked with a blade or scissors, their own mouths slashed to match her disfigurement. Those who answered yes would be forced to look upon her true face in sight so horrible that many victims were said to die of shock or go insane. What makes Masako's transformation into the Kuchisake Onna particularly heartbreaking is the way her obsession with beauty became a self-fulfilling prophecy of ugliness. In life, her fear of losing her beauty drove her to destroy it herself. In death, her quest to understand beauty compels her to destroy it in others. She has become trapped in an eternal cycle of seeking the very thing she can never again possess. The evolution of the Kuchisake Onna legend through Japanese history reflects changing cultural anxieties about beauty and femininity. During the Edo period, the story focused on the dangers of vanity and the importance of inner beauty. In the Meiji era, it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of foreign influences and experimental medical procedures. In modern Japan, where plastic surgery and extreme beauty standards are prevalent, the Kuchisake Onna has evolved into an urban legend that speaks to contemporary fears about the pressure to achieve physical perfection. Contemporary sightings of the Kuchisake Onna are frequently reported in areas surrounding beauty salons, plastic surgery clinics, and fashion districts. Witnesses describe a woman in a surgical mask asking about beauty while lurking near places where people go to alter their appearance. Some modern interpretations suggest she is drawn to these locations by an eternal hope that someone might finally be able to restore what she lost centuries ago. The psychological depth of Masako's tragedy extends beyond simple vanity to encompass broader themes of identity, self-worth, and the destructive power of obsession. Her story reflects the particular vulnerability of women in societies where value is measured primarily by physical appearance and male approval. Masako's beauty was never truly hers. It belonged to her husband, to the court, to a society that praised her for it. When that beauty was destroyed, she lost not just her appearance, but her entire sense of self. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the Kuchisake Onna legend is its suggestion that some forms of damage are irreversible. Unlike other Japanese ghosts who can find peace through resolution or revenge, Masako remains trapped by a question that has no satisfactory answer. She cannot be beautiful again, but she cannot stop seeking beauty. She cannot repair the damage done by her obsession, but she cannot let go of the obsession that defines her existence. Modern psychologists who study body dysmorphic disorder and beauty obsessions see in the Kuchisake Onna a remarkably accurate portrayal of how the pursuit of physical perfection can become a form of mental illness. Masako's story serves as a warning about the dangers of defining self-worth through external validation and the tragic consequences that can result from allowing societal beauty standards to consume one's entire identity. The enduring power of the Kuchisake Onna legend lies not in its ability to frighten, but in its capacity to evoke sympathy for a woman whose greatest sin was loving beauty too much in a world that taught her beauty was the only thing worth loving. Behind the monster is a victim, a woman destroyed by her attempts to preserve what society told her was her only valuable asset, forever searching for an answer to a question that destroyed her life. Am I beautiful? In each tale, we see reflections of our own deepest fears and greatest loves. These ghosts persist not because they are scary, but because they are regrets made manifest, our loves refusing to let go, our obsessions consuming us from within. They remind us that sometimes the most heartbreaking monsters are the ones we create ourselves, and the most powerful hauntings are the ones that happen inside our own hearts.